My name is Wendell Mosby, and I'm the manager of strategic initiatives. And so right now, I'm going to invite our president and CEO, Perry Ermer, up to provide a few remarks this evening.
Thank you, Wendell, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight. You're in for a treat with these big brains up here. I mean, really, we're going to learn a lot this evening. I really value my friendship and the DuSable Museum's relationship with the Sable Heritage Association and my dear friend, Dr. Serge Pierre-Louis. I know we're expecting Mr. Rosier to come and speak about his book. But in the meantime, I want to introduce Dr. Serge Pierre-Louis.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much, Perry, for hosting us this evening and in something that we think is very important, which is the recognition of the founder of the city of Chicago. This morning, we had a whole group of people downtown in Pioneer Court on Michigan Avenue, next to the bust of Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable. They all came to celebrate the 199th anniversary of the death of Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable. He died on the 29th of August, 1818, and every year we get together, we bring some flowers, and we have a ceremony of layering of the wreath at the statue. And this morning we had so many different wreaths. We brought them. You probably have seen them when you came in, and we didn't want to waste them. And right after that, we gave a tour all along the Chicago River, all the way to Lake Michigan. This is the official DuSable Founders Trail, the historical trail where the city of Chicago actually took birth. That's where it all started, right there at the junction of Chicago River and Lake Michigan. So we gave a tour with the group while talking about Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable and his time and his family and all that. Next year is going to be the 200th anniversary of the death of DuSable, and we've started already thinking of what can we do to create a big bang. So we'll appreciate your suggestions. If you have any, please get in touch with us, let us know. But we will again meet downtown at the bust of DuSable. We will walk to the future DuSable Park, which is being currently remediated. There is some toxic thorium, radioactive thorium on it, and the Chicago Park District just started cleaning it up. We are hoping by the end of the year they're gonna replace the revetment wall around the park, and hopefully after that they will start the actual construction of the park. So we will appreciate your support in telling the city of Chicago and the Park District that you feel that this is something important. So having said that, we are not here for that today, for the DuSable Park, but for something else. For a fascinating book that was written a couple of years ago by someone who actually took the time to dwell into the details of the life, of the time, of the work, of the spirit of a man which is unlike other men that we have known. A man who migrated, an immigrant who migrated from another place, came to this area, married an Indian woman, and created what we call now Chicago. And he wrote that book, author Marc Rosier. He had some problem and he's on his way, I believe. And we are fortunate to have with us today Professor Christopher Reed, who has also written about Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable and some aspects of his life. And we have with us the next generation of historian, Courtney King, who just got her PhD in history. So as you look at this table, you see the past and the future. I hope I won't get into trouble by saying that. So therefore, we are in good hands. So I hope you have a good evening. So I understand that there is somebody in the audience who wrote a poem about DuSable. And so before we start the conversation, we'd like to invite her to join us and come here and read her poem for us.
Well, we have in our presence Mama D. And let me just read about Mama D before she reads her original poem. This is from the Cook County Board. Whereas D. Smith Simmons, AKA, also known as Evangel Mama D, is an outstanding educator, activist, author, and International Black Writer Award winner. And whereas Mama D founded, quote, Global Committee Commemorating Kingdom Respect Days, unquote, an organization that observes the principles of human rights and nonviolence. And whereas President Bill Clinton commended Global Committee as an organization that does much for society. And whereas Mama D was invited to participate in President Clinton's inauguration. And whereas Mama D serves on Attorney General Jim Ryan's Violence Against Children Task Force. And whereas Mama D is honored for the Heritage Poem commemorating the 200th anniversary of Jean-Baptiste Pointe-Dussab's founding of Chicago. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the President and members of the Cook County Board of Commissioners take pride in recognizing the many spiritual and humanitarian contributions of Mama D, and hereby extend our sincerest congratulations and offer our best wishes. And be it further resolved that a suitable copy of this resolution be tendered to the family of Mama D as a testimony to the positive impact she has had on the community and recognition of continuous service. And this is signed by the late Honorable John H. Grover Jr. and seconded in years that followed by past President, the Honorable Bobby S. Steele.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to do this impromptu. And my name is, I no longer have that subjugated race name of D. Smith Simmons, but I am now Evangel Mama D Love, Yah, Nubian, Yah as in hallelujah, Nubian as new creature. Thank you. It's called Sable, Father of Chicago, a poetic poem, and my writing name is D. Dawn of a New Eve. His story has not remembered the legacy of your true Jean-Baptiste Pointe-Dussab, Father of Chicago. Eyes look up, but they don't see high signs bearing your name as other races lay claim. We don't see your black face on a city sealed place. Dussab, Father of Chicago, your truth has been trampled to the ground, leaving footprint boots with no straps for your African descendants to pull their spirits up when the bigots of the world are loading them down. The Chicago River, green with envy and a red heart of love for you, his first friend, remembers who you are and what you did from 1779 to 1796. You built the first neighborhood and lived next door to him. The Chicago River that flows backwards knew you, John Baptiste, as a young man moving forward in peace and prosperity. Yes, your mother was a black slave, but that only enhances what you gave. The Chicago River was not racist, and it remembers the powwow chitter-chatter of the first wedding feast, yoked to your Indian bride by a Catholic priest. Then came the pitter-patter of tiny feet. The river had not heard a baby cry, or the clean clang of hoofing horses. The river had never felt the excitement of the first election held, letters delivered, or a day in court. The river had not tasted the sweet smell of bakery goods or eloquent furniture made of fine wood. The river had not seen men with white faces visiting guests, French and British, that traveled from afar to buy fur from your trading settlement post. Enjoy the hospitality of a handsome host. The river did not forget when Marquette came and you had to go for loyalty to the blood of his French father and Indian in-laws. The British threw him in jail and it troubled the waters. The lakeshore waves whispered to the wind, and the wind told the tribune how the skyscraper that touched the feet of heaven in 1996, when the time of humanity was right for uprising truth, righting wrongs, and healing hearts. DuSable, father of Chicago, the river of your reward has baptized our souls. And now we are ready with a clean conscience to rid ourselves of racism and honor your vision of bias-free living. We, the citizens of Chicago, are blessed by what you began over 200 years ago, when D. Pasteur, a British commander, wrote of you in his journal log, DuSable, father of Chicago. The brilliance of your 16 bittersweet years have been darkened by silence of who you are and what you did, but you are our father. And we must honor your heritage because your legacy is truly our own. DuSable, our father. The Chicago River has not forgotten. And as we put flowers on your memory and celebrate Lakeshore DuSable Drive and DuSable Heritage Marquette Park to undo the bias about your beginning, we can look forward to a future of resurrected hope in Chicago, the city of dreams and visions, with a legacy of truth and love that honors us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an inspiring and moving poem. This is the first time I'm hearing it actually, and I'm so glad you took the time to write it. And in some part of it, you referred actually to some historical facts that our two panelists are going to be discussing in just a few minutes. So that was such a nice introduction. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I'd like to get us started with a reflection by Congressman John Wentworth, after whom Wentworth Avenue is named. In 1875, Congressman Wentworth reflected on what would have happened in Chicago had DuSable stayed and won the chieftain's position he wanted with the Potawatomi people. This is what he said in 1875 at McCormick Hall, not the current McCormick Place, but McCormick Hall, during a lecture on one Sunday. Had DuSable's petition to the Potawatomi been granted and he had received the chieftaincy, with this success, DuSable would have made Chicago a Haitian colony in which black would rule white. That's interesting. I think about Obama. Once Obama was elected, floodgates were open to what we're experiencing today. It wasn't a matter of ability ruling over all fairly. It was the fear of black ruling white. This is interesting. I thought that'd be an appropriate opening until Marc Rosier, the author of this book, arrives, for a short discussion on the meaning of this particular mentality, this fear of what could have happened. Rosier's book will talk about the fear that even President Thomas Jefferson had of the Haitian influence of freedom-seeking revolution could have had on this country. Now, we all know that in 1800, Gabriel Prosser had planned for a massive revolution down in Virginia. We know that from the day that the first day that the Africans set foot on South and North American soil, this fire for freedom, to regain the freedom that had been lost at home in Africa, that fire was still burning. So there was legitimate fear that freedom seekers might just be freedom gainers. And that's normal among humanity, to want to be free. You don't have to go to college to understand this. Just look at the birds, the ants, and other insects, and even the flowers as they bloom unfettered and blow in the wind. I'm smiling only because I didn't plan to sound poetic. I would like to entertain a few questions or comments on that fear of Congressman Wentworth, and then we want to hear from this new faculty member from Lake Forest College about some of her work in dealing with the generations of Haitians who carried on the Du Sable tradition here in Chicago. At this point, are there any comments on this fear of black over white, which in reality we know from Mayor Washington and from Obama does not mean that at all. It means fairness. It's black and white, not black over white. Any comment?
Yeah. Well, to me, it seems like, I guess, with Obama, maybe even before that, but particularly with him, it seems like we had a change of that whole meridian, whereas, for instance, during the civil rights era, the idea was if you presented yourself intelligent, well-educated, this was sort of the means to which to communicate that you were safe, Negro or colored person to whites, and they were more inclined to accept you. But with, you know, advancements in different areas of society, you know, by African Americans, you sort of have a change in that whole meridian, whereas now you find more people who, even so-called educated people, the more educated and intelligent you are, particularly ones who are just marginal, you know, I guess the more achieved ones still find the accepting, but the more marginal ones are a little bit more withdrawn, in some cases scared, blankless, if you know what I mean. You know? And so I think I've even, you know, had a feeling with some of well, for instance, the shooting of the LaShawn Donaldson 16 times, and I think amongst whatever clickbait of the, you know, renegade racist cops they got in the CPD, you know, that was amongst themselves, you know, hey, what can we do to signal to him, because he's from Chicago, that he's still a nigger, you know, or to all of us, really. And, you know, so you get to get a lot of false narratives out here talking about, well, if we train them better, and which is antiquated, that went back 40 years, they went through that cycle already. And, you know, instead of just dealing with someone like Morris, I can't remember his last name, with the Southern Poverty Law Clinic, who's citing, or center cites examples of Nazis and claim people who they find on the police force, and they supplement in that manner, that you just got some people who have a racist ideology in their mind.
Right. A quick comment I'd like to make about that, and by the way, we'd like to ask Marc Rosier to come and join us in front, pull a chair and join us.
Right. By the way, he was in Haiti as of yesterday.
Just came back from Haiti. So we apologize for his late arrival. And I wonder if we could have an extra chair here for, I don't know if Wendell has another one of these, if not. And while Marc Rosier is getting settled, just to answer to what the gentleman was saying, I think that fear was quite real actually. The fear of whether blacks can take over, and at the time of Sable, and I think Marc Rosier did mention that in his book, Wentworth went into a whole campaign to deny that Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable was the founder of Chicago. And he wanted John Kinsey to be the person who really was the father, when in fact Du Sable had been there for 20 years before John Kinsey. He just didn't like that idea that Jean-Baptiste Du Sable was the founder. And certainly some of the things you've mentioned must have been the underlying reasons, that fear that somebody else may take over, another ethnic group may come and enslave you. It was a very complex thing, and perhaps Marc Rosier will have a chance to talk a little bit about that discipline.
While we give him a chance to catch his breath, I'm glad to hear. I wonder if you, Professor Kane, would briefly give us a synopsis of what you've completed in the way of a study, your dissertation.
Okay, so it's pretty fresh since I just finished it. So I completed a nearly 300-page research looking at the history of the Haitian community, the Haitian diaspora in Chicago. And so the roots of this diaspora obviously tie directly to Du Sable, and that's why you're referenced a whole lot in the dissertation. When you think about why it was so important for somebody like Wentworth, or somebody like the Kinsey family, to deny Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable's important contribution to the founding of Chicago, I think it's important to think about time. I mean, we are historians, so. So Du Sable comes to Chicago around 1780. It's roughly around that time. And 1791 is when the Haitian Revolution begins on the island of Saint-Domingue. And it blasts through Du Sable, leaving Du Sable leaves Chicago in 1800, and Haitians declare themselves independent in 1804. And so that timeline is pretty much runs alongside each other. So when you think about the importance of then Wentworth coming along and seeing the first and only Black republic, free Black nation, and now the founder of Chicago is telling people he's from this colony, it's pretty important to deny and to downplay his contribution in order to keep certain other people maybe in Chicago from thinking that maybe the same thing is possible. But for a long time, there's a campaign really, and we'll have Marc talk more about that, but the importance of keeping Du Sable's legacy hidden in the city. But if you know any Haitians, you can't keep us down for too long. And so the name of Du Sable ends up continuing to come about due to oral traditions. As Black people know, whether you're from Haiti or you're from the United States, we don't really have paper documents that keep us accurately represented in history. We rely very much on oral histories and oral traditions. And I argue that's a major reason why we know who Du Sable is, because people of color, whether they be Haitian people, African American people, Native people, kept his story alive through oral traditions. And that's why at the turn of the 20th century, that there's a resurgence as more and more Black people come to Chicago, that Du Sable's name starts to ring pretty resoundingly again. That really turns up at the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago, where Black women, specifically a Black woman by the name of Annie Oliver, starts a group to commemorate Du Sable. They replicate his cabin as a way to show Black people who are coming to the city of Chicago that this is a home for us. We're allowed to be here. Somebody like us started the city, so we should be here as well. From there, over the course of the 20th century, you start to see people actually from Du Sable's home country coming to Chicago and repopulating it, kind of in the fear of what Wentworth was talking about, in many ways making it a Haitian colony. It's Haitian people everywhere across the city, mainly started on the south side, but now have kind of spread around the city and into the surrounding suburbs as well. And really the numbers are still growing now. And so if you think about the quote that Dr. Reed started us out with, and think about where we are today, in many ways, Wentworth's fear did come true. Chicago in many ways is a Haitian colony, is a black colony, is a place for people of color, which is what DuSable, I think, in his ingenuity in so many ways, set us up to be a diasporic place, a place for people of all races and creeds to come together. And so for those who feared that and wanted to keep that down and keep a very monolithic history of Chicago alive, I think we've shown, and we show now even tonight, that that did not occur. So I think it's important to continue to commemorate DuSable's story so that black and brown people, the majority of the things that we see about Chicago that deal with us are violent and are negative. So if there's time for us to commemorate our history, how it started with us, and I think will end with us in many ways, I think we always have to keep DuSable in mind with that.
Excellent. We had some questions here we had planned to pepper you with. Want to make you work. You want to start off with, you had several questions, and I'll join in. Dr. Serge.
Serge was really
The
the
first question.
mastermind of these questions.
Interrogator.
Well, we can all pitch in, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. And just trying to get a sense of this book, this thick, more than 500 pages that Marc Rosier invested in, and trying to get a sense of, in the course of writing this book, what is it that you learn about Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable that we don't know about? Tell us a little bit about the man. Who was he? And why was he successful in business at a time when black people were being enslaved? What kind of spirit moved him forward? And what is it that we should remember about him?
Well, DuSable, I guess, reflects the spirits of black people in America, specifically during the time of colonization. But this could be said for people who have suffered in different ways around the world. But because that time period was very hard for the people who had to provide the labor, to conquer this continent. So it was kind of terribly hard on them. Certain people give the land, other people had to provide the labor to transform this into what it is today. So DuSable, his spirit represents that, which is something that you can't kill, something that won't die. When things happen here, like we first meet DuSable in Peoria. And there was, the area was conquered. The history of this place is pretty much the same as the history of many places. There was a revolution going on, and the revolution made it over here in the West. So by 1778, this area was conquered. So where George Rogers Clark was working for Virginia and for something called the United States. So DuSable purchased a property in 1773. So there was nothing called the United States at that time. So he purchased property there. So there, when the conquest took place, then somehow he resurfaced over here. And then things happened over here, he resurfaced. What happened over here, we know by 1795, there was another conquest. The Indians lost the area. So again, a treaty was signed, the Greenville Treaty. So here, part of the lakefront was given to the Americans. So again, DuSable had already established himself in the area.
And as we read your book, we actually can follow DuSable moving from one place to another because of the historical context and the British coming, the American, Chicago, then back to Peoria. Do you have a sense of what was happening at the time that made him leave Peoria, and why did he choose this particular site to come and live here?
Yeah, well, again, what was happening at the time, certain people were moving to the area. As you know, Righteous Claw, George Righteous Claw conquered the area, the Peoria area, basically the 5-6 French colonies over there were conquered. Were in the French had already given them up to the British, and at that point they were in the hands of the British. But then the British colony, some of the colonies, the 13 colonies were able to revolt. So they conquered the area from the British. So of course the Sable left. Find him now in Chicago, the place called Chicago.
And so Sable was not comfortable with the Americans coming close to Peoria?
Well, I have given some of the complaints in the book.
Right.
This is how the French population, how they were feeling regarding the Americans coming in, even though it was portrayed as liberation from the British. And Father Dubois, as you know, was very much involved in helping Clark, but soon it was kind of realized that it wasn't very good for them.
So therefore he had some good reasons to want to move away.
Exactly.
And when he got around here, can you tell us what was the interaction with the Indians? The Potawatomi Indians were predominantly in this area. He ended up marrying one of them and almost became a chieftain, as Professor Reed was saying. Anything you could tell us about that interaction?
Absolutely. When he came over here, so really he found the Indians here. He married among them. He was very popular with the Indians, so he appeared with them in many places. He held as a chief among them. Some of the positions that he held, those were positions reserved for chiefs among the Indians. So they worked with him. We know that. So when he was arrested by the British in 1779, then the Indians appeared and demanded, there was a chief named Mashkiash, demanded his release. And his appointment, not only releasing him, but appointing him as head of the British Republic in the area of Detroit. So we know the Indians, they loved it.
So then for almost 20 years, the Sable was here. He established a trading post and became very successful. Is that what he was doing predominantly? That was the business that he created?
Yeah, so he made the Sable a place to live. He had business over here. People came in and I give references of people coming here, buying from him, reporting themselves how they came here and anchored their boat at his property and exchanged things with him. So that's what he was doing, selling and trading with the Indians, and everybody else was coming in. And this business was the envy of the traders in the area.
And he was also helping people carrying goods to go from Indiana, Michigan, to actually go along the Chicago River, to the Des Plaines River, the Illinois River, and the Mississippi River, and from there all the way down to New Orleans. So there was a vibrant commerce taking place, and part of what he was doing was the portage, in helping carrying stuff from one place to another. Is that correct?
Absolutely, which you will find later on, Kings inherited that. Not only was selling goods in the fashion, some had been selling stuff, but also transporting goods and delivering goods in the area. The same exact business that some had.
So therefore, he was well established, well known for quite some time around here. And if you read the writings of some of the British, Colonel de Peyster that was mentioned earlier, and all that, we can actually follow the path of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, both his public life and little bit some of his personal life. So then what happened? After 20 years, why did he decide to pick up his wife and children and leave Chicago?
So there's another big event happening, and we mentioned the Treaty of Greenville of 1795. So now that's beginning to come true. The Americans are claiming land. So 1800, land is being partitioned, states are being formed out of some of the land in DuSable, and there was word of a fort coming in the area, and this was even published in 1797, so DuSable heard about all of this. The terrible people who were coming, and apparently the culture that had taken over Peoria was the same one that was coming over here. So the word of the fort coming here was already publicized, so he packed up.
So therefore, the fact that he had been arrested earlier, did that have anything to play? He was arrested by the British, not by the Americans. What was the reason why he was arrested actually?
Well, the reason he was arrested, apparently, in the book I tried to explain, because the arresting officer doesn't really say why, simply because he was given orders to arrest people who were sympathetic to the American cause, to the rebel cause, which was, of course, independence. So when they went to River de Chemin, which is today in Indiana, so they found DuSable there, probably having a home, and had a lot of goods there stored in a house, and they arrested him and took over the goods. So it doesn't say what he did wrong. DuSable hadn't done anything wrong. It should be assumed that they didn't know who he was, the arresting officer, and some of the other Indians were brought over there to assist the British. So, because he was held, but there was nothing brought up against him. So instead of doing anything to him wrong, and those guys were actually trying, there's a chapter I call In the Hands of Commanders and Chiefs, because those guys, they decided what to do with it. They could kill you, they could execute you, whatever. They did everything. The commander did everything. So they were the judge and executioner at the same time. And so after Mashiach came up and asked for his release, they released DuSable and then made him a chief, pretty much, over the British depot. So there was no charge ever brought against him.
Mm-hmm. Now, Professor Reed also wrote about some of the reasons why he might have left Chicago. I believe a few years ago you wrote an article about that, Professor Reed. Could you tell us what your thoughts about? What are the reasons why DuSable decided to leave the area in 1800?
When I met Marc Rosier last year and found out about his thesis, a lot of my questions were answered. That is, I had never connected the American fear of a Haitian colony, a repeat of Santo Domingo here in the States, with DuSable's reasoning. But as you said, and as I mentioned, the victory in 1794 that led to the treaty in 1795 that gave away Chicago to the USA obviously influenced his thinking. Now, there was no way in the world that DuSable, being as smart as he wouldn't have seen in the future Americans saying, you cannot hold the status that you hold and these possessions in our domain. It was a successful man, Barack Obama, DuSable, who was where he shouldn't have been. There's a model there, you see. And so, and you just mentioned the fort. The fort, they started building Fort Dearborn in 1803. And that was the first instance where the Americans were going to let you know their way of life was coming. And the American way of life during this period was one where it was white over black. Totally white over black. White nationalism. And there was no way in the world that DuSable could have felt secure. But I'm grateful to you for bringing in this other dimension where diplomacy seems to make sense. Jefferson tried to isolate the Haitians. The Haitians wanted to live in peace, basically, with their neighbors throughout the Caribbean and up in the U.S., continental North America. And the Americans weren't going to have it because of their fear of black power. So I have to thank you again. I said this last year when I met you. So this answered a lot of my questions. Let me just say though, you had mentioned the way DuSable lived and how he functioned as a major commercial leader. And he had so much that what he had would have made him the envy of anybody coming in from the U.S. Well, what I liked about a historian back 80 years ago, a man by the name of Kwafi, yes, was that he found the bill of sale where DuSable sold all of these goods and the homestead. And by the way, these pewter plates and china. And I imagine, and DuSable had paintings on the wall. He didn't live in a cabin. Professor King and I discussed this. He did not live in a cabin. He lived in a structure that would have been something that the natives and the French would have agreed on, instead of going horizontal in the typical cabin that you saw in movies on the frontier, would have been vertically. And it would have been a lovely home. And we know that what, as you mentioned, baked goods. Oh, you had a bakery. They ground up meal. He had livestock. He had tools. He was tremendous. He was, he was like the late, who was the fellow that owned, can't think of his name. He died early, but he was on the New York Stock Exchange, and I'm sorry, but he was the first millionaire, black millionaire in America. Very successful. Anyway, thank you again, Professor.
So then the question again is, what was different about the spirit of DuSable that made him do the things that you are describing there? Now, unfortunately, DuSable didn't write anything. So when he left Chicago, he sold his home to Lalim, who then sold it to John Kenzie. And we know more about John Kenzie in Chicago. We know the Kenzie Street because Kenzie kept books and he wrote everything down, all the transactions, and DuSable didn't write anything. So as Professor Kane mentioned, DuSable lived in the purest tradition, oral tradition of oral transmission of history. But Kenzie basically wrote everything. So it was easier to say Kenzie is the founder of Chicago and not DuSable. So have we found any writing of DuSable, and do we know why he didn't write anything?
Well, we can't say he didn't
I
write.
was gonna say that, we don't
Right,
know
we
that.
don't know,
It could have gotten destroyed
Absolutely.
Okay.
by.
We haven't found yet his writings.
Yeah.
We haven't
We haven't
found,
found him yet.
there's that uncovered what he may have written.
And yet we are told that he was born of a white father and a slave mother on the island of Saint Domingue, Haiti, before he migrated to New Orleans and then along the Mississippi River to the Chicago area. Some historians say he went to France and was educated there, but we have no evidence to corroborate that. We don't know whether he was actually educated, and he used to sign his name, his initials on some of the papers, but we haven't seen any other writings from him. And so that may explain some of the reasons why he's been kind of in the back of history in a way. But we know a little bit about his character, his temperament, to the writings of other people. Or how would you describe him? What were his personal traits that explain why he was successful?
He's a fun guy.
Professor Ken, you want to comment on that?
They're just like my favorite things about him. So, you know, he's best known as a handsome Negro. That's like the number one thing that's written about him in the archive. An affinity for drink, which I thought was very funny. That, you know, when he would have people at his home, he was like a really great host. And so, you know, he would show them around his homestead and, you know, give them good food and good drink, and was just an overall kind of jovial man. So just very smart, obviously, very, you know, business oriented, but then overall seemed like a really fun guy. We kind of think about these people in history as static and one-dimensional, and they're like, in the past. But then when you kind of think of them as being people like me and you as a whole person, that's my favorite part of history, is kind of personalizing these people. So I enjoyed that.
You know, I can imagine that if he were planning to have a chieftaincy, notice that among the Potawatomi and the other native groups, they would have more than one chief. You had someone who, as you said, his job would have been chief dealing with the British. Yeah, and somebody else would have been a chief over military affairs, somebody else a chief over other diplomatic affairs, another person a chief over counseling people who had problems within the group. But I see ambition as one of his characteristics. Very ambitious and courageous. You just don't go in the middle of nowhere and start what he did. And then he was farsighted. And that is shown in the success of his commercial operations. I shared with Professor Kane acknowledgement of DuSable that goes back, I think it's 1970. Went on radio station WFMT FM, as I say, that the rich people in this area, the aristocrats, listen to, you know, fan music. On that station, they broadcast, and I have a copy of the broadcast, a statement from Leo Burnett's advertising agency saying DuSable had a dream, and the dream was realized, a city emerging on the lake where the river meets the lake, a great commercial place. And United Airlines, you need to see this, Perry, United Airlines can bring you to this great commercial center. So I got a copy of that from them. Now, it was never printed up. It was never sent out for release. It was only to be heard over WFMT, which I thought was significant because that's the station that people with money would be listening to, as well as maybe a station that might have business news. But ambitious, courageous, far-seeking.
Family man, too.
Family man.
Yes, family man. We know that he had his children. We know that according to Professor Rosier's book, he got together with some friends. They went all the way to Missouri to the baptism of the daughter of their friend. So he seemed to enjoy this kind of family thing. And another characteristic I believe was that he was trustworthy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why the Indians trusted him, and they asked him to represent them when the Indians had to negotiate with the Americans who wanted to displace them.
Right.
Also, he gained the trust of St. Clair. After he was arrested, he became actually the manager of the estate of St. Clair. The guy who arrested him, put him in jail, he ended up working for that guy. So he must have been had a way of attracting trust in people, I would say, as well.
Can't wait to also add that the arresting officer, Edmund Sinclair, he said that there were a lot of people who came out to speak on his behalf. So imagine the entire area. This is a person of a different race. No one had anything negative to say about him. So all the character references were rather excellent.
Professor Rosier, how did you get interested in history? And how did you get interested in DuSable?
That's true, okay. Well, originally, my intention was to be a theologian. I'm very much into that, by the way. It doesn't seem like it, but I am mostly interested in spiritual things. So my original idea, now I would say don't take it for, well, originally when I was a child, it was mostly Christianity, but as I got older, kind of I broadened that, it kind of encompassed other things, other aspect of spirituality. So in my studies of that, I was very much in the Middle East, or the ancient Near East, as historians call it. So the land of the Bible, this was my interest, the old Babylon. Right. So those were my interests. So that's what got me interested in history. In DuSable in particular, when I came to Chicago, I became a teacher at DuSable High School. And there I learned that there was a person who was the founder of the city. So I decided to do some research to learn about him. That was all the research I traveled and collected information and lost. So at some point, Dr. Pierre-Louis here had an organization. So when I found that they were interested in DuSable too, and I told them the work that I had done, and he remembered that and called on me and said, well, you said that you were interested in DuSable, so they invited me to talk to them. So Dr. Pierre-Louis also should get some credit for the book, because even though my intention, by the way, was to mention, even though his organization is mentioned in the book, but my intent was to have a second version in which there would be more said about what's going on right now with the organization to actually to move DuSable forward, where we kind of still start with this book. So his organization called me up, so I was involved in helping them, and he talked about DuSable, so he would listen and ask information, ask questions about DuSable, and we put together a show. We brought students from different, I think mostly from Florida to Chicago in 2008, 2009. Yeah, so, and I wrote the little brochure for the organization, so that kind of rekindled the fire in me. So all the information I had collected, let me continue now to turn it into a book. I was trying to surprise Dr. Bill right away. So so
Well, I definitely was surprised by such a thing. The big book that came out of all those thoughts and reflections. Are there any questions from the audience as we move forward? We would entertain any motion. Yes, in the back there.
I was wondering, when they show different documents, you know, or documentaries on Channel 11, PBS, but it goes to say that he was buried, or matter of fact, they had a whole program where a guy was looking for the grave site. And so I was wondering, did the professor locate a stick, a bone, or somebody that somebody else hadn't found yet, that would tell him that yes, the nuns did have it somewhere, and maybe they're not telling the general public.
Any comments on that, Professor?
Well, he was buried in St. Charles. So there was someone who was looking. If I mentioned that, I referenced that because I went to the grave site several times, to find it. So what they're saying is that where they thought he had been buried, apparently wasn't there. That cemetery had been moved a number of times. So the original place of burial. So when they move people, you have to have someone to speak for you. And apparently some of those people had died. You know, his two children, Suzanne and Jean, had died. Apparently there had been no one to speak on his behalf. So that's my conclusion about why maybe we don't know exactly where when they move all the deceased in the new cemeteries that he knew was not among them. But he's still buried there because when they move people around, so we don't know whether they move him. But he is buried in St. Charles.
Right, and I think you are referring to, there was a professor who actually, that was his research. He could, from bones, actually reconstruct the facial features of somebody who died 200 years ago. So he tried to do that. And he went looking for the bones of Sable so he could reconstruct his physical appearance. Unfortunately, he couldn't find them for the reasons that Professor Rosier just mentioned. They had moved that cemetery and he wasn't sure where the bones were any longer.
So you do have a big monument there honoring DuSable. So that particular monument, he's simply saying that DuSable remains may not have been exactly there, but his remains may have been in the original place where they had buried him. Because the church, they actually mentioned that DuSable was buried in 19 there. So he is in St. Charles, Sable Cemetery, the original one.
So we wanted to comment.
I wanted to comment on the success of the Sable, what's the coalition name that's been fighting for the park?
We have now the Sable Park Coalition.
Right. When I first joined, I heard talk of what could be. One of the things that the coalition succeeded in doing 4 or 5 years ago was having the Chicago City Council declare that the city's birthday, March 4th, was to be forever known as Du Sable Day as well. That's official, that's in the journal proceedings of the Chicago City Council. Now, what happened in the years since that declaration in action was that the Polish American community wanted recognition, and they've taken over the day as well. It's now Pulaski Day. So I haven't heard too much about the Sable Day, or maybe that's part of a campaign led by the coalition, including the Sable Museum, to get out to the public what was already made an enactment. I mean, it's in writing.
Right. The 4th of March is actually the date of incorporation of Chicago as a town.
Yeah.
So therefore, years ago, we did have the city of Chicago take that ordinance that the 4th of March was officially Du Sable Day, and all organizations should take measures to celebrate that day. And we did it for a number of years. But Pulaski had always been in the background, lurking around, and now there is that situation where I think we need to stand our ground.
Right.
That it is Du Sable Day, but to make that happen, we need to collectively actually be doing things on that day. And in order for somebody else not to come and claim the same date for their own agenda. And we are very grateful to the Du Sable Museum. Actually, for a number of years, we came here every year on the 4th of March, and we had a number of cultural events right here. And the mayor of Chicago came to some of them. And so claiming that date for ourselves. So it's a constant struggle.
Yeah.
Now, are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, go ahead.
Pulaski Day, isn't it a holiday?
That's correct. It used to be a holiday, and is it still
Yes.
a holiday? Okay.
Holiday, I just looked it up.
Yeah, to match Martin Luther King Day. That's
It's the first Monday of every March.
Yeah.
First Monday of March?
Mhm.
Okay, so Du Sable doesn't have a holiday, but Pulaski has one.
Right, it's a holiday, and things are closed.
And that was to match King Day. That's the thinking behind that.
Right.
That the African Americans and people of the diaspora can have a day, King Day, then somebody else should have a day. That was the thinking.
Only thing is, Pulaski Day is limited to Chicago, Illinois, and
Yeah.
Dr. King is national.
That's correct.
Right.
No comparison.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. While we're waiting for more questions, there are-
I had a question.
Yes.
Just for historical context, what do you mean when you say Americans invaded and caused Sable to move? Because I'm kind of confused when you're saying somebody's invading, but at the same time, they are the people there already. So are you saying the French or the British invaded to move the Sable out?
Well,
Yeah, timing.
yeah, timing. Yeah. Well, see, when the big battle took place near Toledo in 1794, hundreds, thousands of native warriors fought thousands of American troops. Now, a couple of years before, people need to know this, there was another battle a couple of years before where the Native Americans had beaten the Americans. And then they came back in 1794, fallen timbers, and they beat the native people. The next year, 1795 in Greenville, there was this treaty, and when you lose big. So the Americans said, we want land here, there, and everywhere. That's ours. Native Americans saying, Du Sable tried to stop it, as you say in your book, giving away all this land, but the Americans got this land at the mouth of the river and lake. And so he knew what was coming. The Americans were going to come, and he knew the attitudes.
So you think about it, 1776, is when the 13 colonies become America, right? But the rest of it, a slow but treacherous move west is what happens. And so that's kind of the era that we're talking about, is that this land is very much still contested in the 1780s into the 1790s. Native Americans are still living here. They're like, heard you guys got a country, but that has nothing to do with me.
Right.
In a very crude fashion, but, and so as they push west, they're pushing native populations out of areas like the Midwest, areas like Illinois. And so it's not until the 1790s that this land really becomes a real battleground for new Americans.
Right, because my thing, because I'm recording it for the future generations to make sure that we use the precise words.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So we think about, when we think about America, or when young people think about America, they think about North America and the contiguous 48 states, and it was always like that. But it wasn't always like that. And so it was 13 small colonies on the East Coast, and then over the course of really into the, early 20th, 19th century, we add the last two, which are random, in the 20th century, but over the late 1700s, 1800s is when there's a land grab that turns the rest of the United States into the United States.
Manifest destiny, right?
Yes,
Okay.
and the Louisiana Purchase, those sorts of things are what end up creating the states as we know them.
Right.
Therefore, as they were moving, as the new Americans were moving west, they were displacing local populations who had been very comfortable with their life and were afraid of the Americans coming toward them. You have to remember, for example, somebody like Sable, a black man, to have the Americans come toward him, close to him, at a time when slavery was widespread, and the way of life of the Americans would be to support slavery. You can imagine that somebody like Sable would want to move away. And that may be actually one of the reasons why he left Chicago. When he heard that they were going to build Fort Dearborn, which was kind of would be stamping the westward expansion of the Americans. Well, then if you have the Americans around, you have slaves around, and maybe he wouldn't be able to be a free man any longer. Who knows?
And Marc Rosier talks about this in the book, but a lot of the people who come to Illinois to populate are from Virginia and Kentucky, slave states, slave areas. And so if they're coming to Illinois, that's the ideology, the commerce that they're bringing with them. So it definitely is in complete, an antithesis to kind of what DuSable was building in that land. Does that make more sense?
It's building, because I would have more.
The Northwest ordinance too?
That's 1789, isn't it?
1787. Yeah. But, there was to be no slavery, but that was, we all know even in Illinois, with the Constitution, there was this provision that you can bring slaves from neighboring Missouri or Kentucky into Illinois for seasonal work.
Right.
We also know that seasonal work might have been 12 months a year.
Exactly.
And that free people with papers could be kidnapped and made into slaves. Let me just say, I was thinking about the Blackhawks last week, and the Black Hawk War was a symbol of the end of Native American influence in Illinois, because the Indians had been pushed west of the Mississippi, and they had corn growing east of the Mississippi in their old lands, and as the chief brought his people back to field the corn, harvest the corn, the Americans say you shouldn't be here. It was in 1836, 1837, and they never came east of the Mississippi again as they were defeated. And it's interesting, the team took the name the Blackhawks.
Right.
And by the way,
These things.
yeah, in the last, the Potawatomi left about 1836. The government had trading goods that all cost, I think, 50 cents, and the natives were given a lot of 50-cent pieces. And when they left, leaving Chicago, heading west across, it's not funny, because they ended up in Kansas. They have a reservation of the Potawatomi people in Kansas. When they left, they didn't have 50 cents pieces. They had traded it back. And they had these goods that probably didn't last long.
again, this kind of speaks to DuSable's foresight, right? Because I ended up finding something very disturbing at some point in the census data. So like 1890 census, border of Illinois and Missouri, there's a man in Missouri who has a home with a bunch of indentured servants. And one of them is a young Haitian man. Like it says that he's from Haiti. And he's an indentured servant, and this is 25 years after the end of the Civil War. So when you think about it, again, showing that DuSable foresight, right? Like, even if you're free as a black person, are you ever really free? Or is that potential for you to have your freedom taken from you at some point? So it makes very much sense that 100 years prior, DuSable was like, this is probably not the best place to stay. Because even 100 years later, somebody very much like him in the area gets indentured.
Yeah. Now also too, I've also took time to study the Potawatomi, their language, and some of their complexions. And through my studies, I found that they had some African language in their language, preferably the Medu Necha that come out of Egypt. And
Wow.
and also, DuSable got married from my studies at the Cahokia Mounds.
Yes.
Which I'm trying to find a connection with that, and knowing how the river, just like the Nile in Egypt, was one of our commercial, routes as far as that. So, because some of my arguments, just to say, sometimes I think that we talk about slavery and don't realize that we were all around the world already, and that all of us didn't come over here on a slave ship. Because sometimes we say, oh, slave, but you can't say you're the rich people of the planet and then say, well, this is a new world to you. Because when I read Columbus' diary from his son Ferdinand, he said his father told him that in Haiti, he saw Negroes. So, and even I took studies on Haiti, when they won, they said that they were an indigenous army. And so I try to bring that in sometimes to let us know that our history is just not over here as slavery, but some of us also have been able to trace our history back to our forefathers that were here when Columbus got here. So that was some of my argument.
There's a book, I'll tell you about it.
Okay.
Actually, there are two other connections that are quite interesting in Professor Rosier's book between Illinois and Haiti, which I had not realized. The first one is that way before DuSable came here, there were two French entrepreneurs who went to the island of Saint-Domingue and picked up 500 slaves and brought them to southern Illinois to work in gold and lead mines. And so right there you had a number of Haitians living in southern Illinois 50 years before DuSable even...
and also I wanted to touch on the word slave, because earlier you said something like his father was white, his mother was slave. Now historical context, if I was a child, I wouldn't understand it, but for etymology reasons, the word slave really first comes from the word Slav, right? As far as Eastern European. So sometimes I've been taught to more sometimes say we were prisoners of war compared to, we were just slaves, because sometimes that makes us think that we just slaves, So that's kind of wanted to add on to that too.
And the second connection that I found that actually to the book of Professor Rosier is that after Haiti won its independence around that the independence was in 1804, but in 1820, a lot of the black Americans, they were having trouble here because of racism, because of slavery still going on, and they were thinking of leaving America. And President Boyer, president of Haiti, actually welcomed them and free of charge and paid for their travel, paid for their housing in Haiti. Any black Americans who wanted to migrate to Haiti was welcome. And out of Illinois, there was about 80 of them who actually left Illinois and went and lived in Haiti. They took advantage of that offer of the president of Haiti.
I could connect that to the Missouri Compromise. One of the provisions, original provisions, was that no free black people. Remember, Illinois and Missouri are next door to each other. You had all these blacks already in Missouri and southern Illinois. No free blacks were to be included in the new state. Now that was relaxed, but that was the original provision in 1819. stated it was 1821. So I could see people from that area who had been free, knowing that they weren't welcome once Missouri became part of the United States of America. You have to remember that even the northern states covered by the Northwest Territory, they all had provisions to prevent free people from coming into their territory, starting with Ohio, then Indiana. Illinois did not want free black people coming in. That's why they put this provision that you had to have so much money in the way of a, what would you call it, a bounty or a deposit that you wouldn't, so $250, $500,000 before you would be admitted into the state. Because you were not wanted in the northern free states. You weren't wanted in the south, and you weren't wanted in the northern free states. That explains the colonization effort.
So the more things change, the more they are the same. Terry, there was a question in the back a minute ago. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Something is missing because early this morning when we have a commemoration to honor our great friend of Haiti, Sable, and for some reason we feel that we didn't have the support necessary to make it happen the way it should be. If it was any type of celebrations, Chinese celebration, Greek celebration, or any other celebration, the city would be involved. The city would be set up a platform, sound system, everything for us. So we have to do everything by ourselves because we Haitians. I feel that the Sable Museum, for example, is already established because of Jean-Baptiste Paul and Sable. If Jean-Baptiste Paul and Sable was not coming here, there would be no museum. Same thing for the great professor who wrote the book. You won't be able to write anything about it because there will be nothing to write. Same thing for the Sable Heritage by Dr. Pierre-Louis. So my question is, why can we join ourselves together as different organizations or writers or authors or museums, holding hands together and demand that you say March 4th, that was a provision to be
the
Sable Day.
Yeah.
We have the power as a human being, we have a power as people to make it happen. And then me personally, I was born in Haiti. I had the opportunity to write a song called Chicago, dedicated to Jean-Baptiste Paul and Sable. We would like to have the opportunity to have the song combined with all of you, including the Sable Museum, because this is the name of the song. The song is about Jean-Baptiste Paul and the Sable Heritage, Auditorium. The song is about Jean-Baptiste Paul and Sable. Mr. Rosier, your book is about Jean-Baptiste Paul and Sable. Can we all do like the Chinese doing with the Chinatown? We hold hands together and make things happen, become a power.
Well,
if we do that, nobody can beat us.
And all I can say is amen. You are perfectly right, and that's the purpose of the Sable Coalition. We are trying to do exactly what you just described. Can we get everybody with some interest in the history of Sable, in what he did, and whatever connection, all of them to sit around the table and have a common agenda. And we are starting with the Sable Park, but beyond that, there is the larger recognition of Sable. Even after the park is built, we would have to remain involved and make it a successful park. So you are completely right. We should all work together for that purpose.
We did see the city, the mayor of the city.
Yes, absolutely. It's an uphill battle for all kinds of reasons. Some of those reasons are actually enrooted in history that we are discussing this evening. It's not going to be easy. But you are right. We need, and I think Perry wants to make some comments about that, but definitely it's something we should strive for.
So next year, 2018, is also the bicentennial of the state of Illinois.
Oh.
Okay, and so we've been asked, obviously, to participate in that. So I want to be sure that Dr. Rosier, that all of you put together a program with us so that we can talk about the influence of DuSable in Illinois and all of these historical facts that we're talking about now, to bring that out in a historic panel, and an academic panel for some point next year.
So the comment that Perry is making is next year is going to be the 200th anniversary of Chicago as a city.
Illinois as a
Of
state.
Illinois as a state.
Yeah,
And it's also a gubernatorial election.
So that's it's also a gubernatorial election. So we need to combine all forces, as you were suggesting. We're going to celebrate the state of Illinois. We're going to be celebrating the 200th anniversary of the death of DuSable. And we'll put everything together.
When is that?
It's going to be next summer. Perry, when are you planning on doing your own?
It's a year-long thing, so
Yeah, it's
we
a
have
whole
to
year.
coordinate. Yeah.
Okay, it's the whole year,
And
and
in March.
we'll start in March with the Sable Heritage Gala, and we're going to move into the summer with the laying of the wreath, and we'll continue all the way to December.
Let me say that historically, the museum has always been at the forefront of promoting an acknowledgement of DuSable. I remember about 20 years ago when the whole Harold Washington Auditorium was filled, Potawatomi came, the Archdiocese of Chicago, the Catholic was there, African Americans, Haitians, everybody was there. I can remember a little bit after that, when this room was filled by the Centennial Committee, which focused in on DuSable, and then on other occasions. So DuSable Museum has been in the forefront. It's just that people forget, or they weren't here. And then we were talking about, you were talking about Haitians in Chicago, and I was looking at the date, 1903, I think, when in print, the story of DuSable as the founder came out in the Chicago Tribune. And then it was picked up in the colored or Negro or black community down in Bronzeville. That's why there was a school name for it. The black community demanded that
They
name.
renamed it.
Yeah, because it was the new Wendell Phillips.
Yep.
And they said, no, this will be named after DuSable. The 10 Black says you couldn't call it DuSable because it sounded too much like disabled.
Yes.
So it was DU.
Yeah.
But so there's been a lot in the way of activities, coordinated activities. It's just that you have to get together to find out what the history was so that you can make the future what it should be.
And even this exhibit that's surrounding us tonight is about DuSable and his Native American wife, Kitty Howell. It's called Kitty Howell's Chandelier. And the photographer, Nicolas Henry, a French photographer, very well-known photographer in France, worked with area students. So all the children's faces that you see here, these are all kids from Bronzeville, Southeast Side, and some French students from the north side, from École Française. And the story, the children helped to write this story about DuSable or his descendants and what he would have thought of today's Chicago. So I encourage you to look through here and look at the captions and see what the students were talking about. And this collage here represents the freed slaves, the runaway slaves being taken in by the Native Americans into the tribe and the commingling of the races in the Native American tribes. So again, we really make a serious effort to bring forth that story of DuSable. And we had even talked about, creating a gallery when we expand that is about DuSable, the story of DuSable.
The permanent
Yeah, permanent. So when Margaret Burroughs created the museum in 1961, it was originally called the Editing Museum. And then she changed the name to the DuSable Museum to honor the founder of Chicago. So I think next year we should make a
Can I make one
serious
small
effort.
comment? I'm talking about Margaret Burroughs.
Yes.
In 1984, down at the Palmer House, You know how energized she was always. She said, she stood up before hundreds of people and she said, look, from now on, when I mail a letter, I'm gonna put my address down as DuSabeville, Illinois. And I want all of you to follow my lead.
And by the way, Wycliffe Jean is performing
Yeah.
next Saturday at the African Festival.
He's gonna be at the.
At the African Festival.
That's good.
Yeah.
So spread the word on that.
Yes, we will. Well, so again, we'd like to thank the Sable Museum and Perry Eimer for their gracious invitation for us to use their facility to celebrate the founder of the city. We hope this is the beginning of a collaboration, as suggested earlier, where we will continue the struggle together for both the recognition of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable and for the building of the Sable Park. We need to join forces to make this happen. We also would like to thank our panelists this evening, Professor Rosier. Professor Rosier, who joined us after his trip from Haiti and made every effort to come with us. The next generation, Professor Ken, Courtney Ken, who is the future of Chicago. Professor Reed, who is not only the past, but also the future of Chicago, because he keeps writing. He's still very active. And I don't know if you have read some of his books. It's a real delight. When I start one of his books, I cannot put it down. I have to have a dictionary next to me every time I read it. That's okay. And and of course, we'd like to thank you for taking the time, for coming and share into that discussion with us. If you have any further questions, we have another few minutes where we're gonna stay around. You can talk directly to the author. And also, if you are interested in his book, which I highly recommend, you can talk to him directly in finding out how to get a copy. It's like a Bible.
Well, I think it should be sold in the summer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I think you are selling it here.
I hope we are.
You
It's
had
not
a few-
open tonight, but.
Okay, so you can find the book here as well, or directly from Professor Rosier. And of course, finally, we'd like to thank the staff of the museum. Wendell has been very helpful, and some of the staff people, they've been there working with us in making this event happen. So thank you so much. And good night to all of you.